this deep dive, it kind of has me wondering, like, are we going to see a whole different world map, in our lifetime?
Wow.
We're diving into this conversation between these two experts, and
Yeah.
let's just say they did not mince words, like, at all, about the future of Pakistan.
Yeah, it's a fascinating discussion. And you're right. I mean, they really get into this kind of like core question of whether the Pakistani army, which, has for so long kind of been the force in Pakistan, can handle all the pressure that it's facing right now.
Yeah, and there's a lot of it. We're talking, rising tensions with the Baloch people.
Right.
You've got a restive Pashtun population.
Mm.
And then you throw Imran Khan into the mix. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
where do you even start?
Yeah. I mean, well, expert one who, it's very clear, listening to them, they know that region inside and out. Kept coming back to Baluchistan and described this, really like powder keg situation where you have the Baloch people who are, increasingly frustrated, particularly by the way that China is extracting resources from their land.
And it's not just talk. I mean, they're actually taking action. We saw that recent attack on Chinese personnel.
Yeah.
And they're targeting these very specific opportunities.
Right.
It really feels like a very deliberate strategy to get China's attention.
Absolutely. And, what's really alarming is just the growing strength and sophistication of groups like the Majid Brigade. These aren't just, small-scale attacks anymore.
Right.
They're becoming much more daring, much more sophisticated in their planning and execution.
Yeah.
This is not a minor inconvenience for China at this point.
No, and it makes you wonder, could this embolden China to the point where they feel like they need to justify a stronger military presence in the region?
Right.
Because expert one seemed to think that was definitely on the table.
Yeah. And that's where things get really interesting, I think, for Pakistan. Because on the one hand, they need China's economic support.
Right.
There's no question about that.
Of course.
But if they become too reliant on China, especially militarily, that could really jeopardize their relationship with the U.S. So it's a real balancing act.
It's like being stuck between a rock and a hard place, really.
Yeah.
And speaking of the U.S., I was really fascinated by this point that expert one made about how, Baluchistan's strategic location, makes it a potential U.S. play.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, you think about it. You've got access to Iran, Afghanistan, even Russia.
It's a geopolitical goldmine.
It's amazing, right? Like, you can totally see the logic there.
You can totally see the strategic logic. Expert 2 was pretty quick to point out that the U.S. has a lot on its plate globally right now. So direct intervention in Baluchistan seems, unlikely in the near term, unless, something really drastic happens. Like if the situation with Iran really goes south, then all bets are off.
Right.
But
it becomes a much more interesting, proposition.
Exactly.
Yeah, but even without that direct intervention, just the fact that it's on the U.S.'s radar, it adds this whole other layer to it. It's like this, invisible pressure point in the region.
Absolutely. And then, as if Baluchistan wasn't enough to worry about, the conversation then shifts to the Pashtun areas, where the Pashtun Tahafuz movement, or PTM as they're known, is gaining traction. And they're very much about nonviolent resistance. They draw very explicitly on the legacy of Ghaffar Khan, which, as you can imagine, puts them at odds with the Pakistani army's usual approach to these kinds of things.
And that contrast is exactly why the Pakistani state is so, freaked out by the PTM.
Yeah.
Because their demands, self-determination, resource rights, they want development in the former FATA areas. I mean, these aren't exactly radical ideas.
No.
And they resonate with a lot of people, and not just, within Pakistan's borders either.
Right. And what's worse, there are already signs that the Pakistani state's control is weakening,
Right.
Expert one gave some really alarming examples, police officers going on strike, people just openly defying government orders.
Wow.
Even instances of tear gas being fired back at the police. I mean, it's
like a scene from a movie, tear gas being fired back at the police.
It's not a good sign, right?
Not a good sign. And then on top of all of that, to make things even more interesting, you have Imran Khan entering the scene.
Right. Talk about a wild card. This is where the conversation really takes a turn, I think. Both experts agree that Imran Khan is a force that the Pakistani army just can't seem to control.
It's kind of ironic when you think about it, because he was their protege at one point.
I know.
Right. And now he's their biggest headache. I mean, they obviously want to silence him, but they're also terrified of the backlash, especially from, from young people who see him as this beacon of hope.
Yeah, and it's not hard to see why they're worried, because expert one brought up this chilling point, which is, what happens if you have Punjabi units in the army that are asked to fire on Punjabi crowds?
Right.
Like, that suggests a potential fracture within the Army's own unity that is almost unthinkable, right?
Yeah, like the fabric of their power structure is being tested in a way.
Exactly. And then you add in Imran Khan's media savvy.
Right.
I mean, this is a guy who understands how to connect with young Pakistanis in a way that the old guard just doesn't.
He's disrupted the playbook. I mean, even the ISPR, the military's media wing, they just seem completely outmatched.
They're struggling to keep up. They really are.
Yeah.
He's really mastered the art of controlling the narrative.
He's a force to be reckoned with, for sure.
Yeah.
So you've got these rising tensions in Baluchistan.
Right.
You've got this growing Pashtun movement. You've got this completely unpredictable Imran Khan.
Yeah.
And with all that going on, Expert One drops this bombshell. By 2027, they believe that Pakistan's map, as we know it, will be unrecognizable.
It's a bold claim.
Yeah.
What I found interesting is that Expert 2 doesn't dismiss it out of hand.
Right.
They acknowledge that the current Army chief, Asim Munir, while he's not weak by any stretch of the imagination, he's facing a crisis unlike anything that Pakistan has seen before.
And Expert One was very quick to point out, it's not just about, Munir's strength as a leader.
Right.
It's the fact that the Army's image, their aura of invincibility, has taken a real hit.
For sure.
You've got the constant casualties in Baluchistan.
Yeah.
You've got the situation in the Pashtun areas.
Yeah.
And then you combine that with Imran Khan just constantly, sort of like chipping away at their credibility. It's definitely taking a toll.
It's like every time they try to tighten their grip on things, another part of the country seems to be slipping away.
It's true, and it's like you said, they're heavy-handed tactics, the things they've relied on for so long.
Yeah.
They're almost backfiring at this point.
Yeah, I mean it's like, you're trying to put out a fire with gasoline. It just doesn't work.
And it's not just the military response that feels so out of touch, Expert One pointed out how even the Pakistani government's reaction to these attacks on Chinese personnel in Baluchistan.
Right.
It felt almost comical, all these apologies and promises of investigations. It rings hollow after a while.
It does make you wonder if they're even hearing the concerns, let alone, actually addressing them in a meaningful way.
Right. It's like they're stuck in this loop of just ineffective responses.
Yeah, it's like they don't know how to have a conversation. They just know how to have a reaction.
It's just a reaction. And it's not just the Baloch insurgency that they're kind of mismanaging here, right?
Right.
Expert 2 really highlighted the inherent tension in Pakistan's relationship with China. I mean, on the one hand, of course, they need China's money.
Of course.
But, becoming completely beholden to them,
right.
That's a whole other can of worms.
It is. It's a classic case of, needing to balance dependencies.
Yes.
I mean, Pakistan has this long history of relying on the U.S. for military and economic aid.
Right.
And as much as there have been ups and downs in that relationship, there's a reluctance to just completely abandon it.
Especially when you consider what Expert One was saying about kind of the cultural factors at play here. I mean, they made the point that Pakistanis, by and large, feel much more comfortable, sending their kids to study in the U.S., investing their money in property in the U.S. There's this underlying distrust of China. This sense that maybe their interests aren't aligned with Pakistan's long-term well-being.
Yeah, it's this complex web of, economic anxieties, political anxieties, even, cultural anxieties, I think, that Pakistan is trying to navigate here. And then you throw in the unpredictability of someone like Imran Khan.
Oh, yeah. Speaking of Imran Khan, I was really struck by Expert 2's analysis of his appeal. I mean, it's more than just charisma, right? Like, he's really tapped into this yearning for change, especially among, Pakistan's youth, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, he represents a clear break from, these legacy parties that have dominated Pakistani politics for decades. And he's done what none of them have been able to do, which is connect with young people on their level,
Yeah.
Social media, a message of hope, even if, you may disagree with some of what he says.
Right.
But he's connecting, and he's doing it in a way that has really flipped the script on traditional media. you know?
He really has, and it's kind of amazing to see, like, the establishment just struggling to catch up.
I know.
Even the ISPR, the military's, like, media wing,
Yeah, they seem totally outmatched.
they're just completely outmatched by Imran Khan's savvy.
Yeah. It really highlights how powerful social media is, especially in a country like Pakistan where, traditional media has for so long been, censored,
Yeah.
controlled.
Mm.
Khan's found a way to kind of bypass those gatekeepers and speak directly to people.
He really has, and they're listening, which is, it's remarkable in and of itself. But it's not just the message, right? It's the fact that he's also so willing to openly challenge the military, which was, I mean, unthinkable not that long ago.
Right. He's really chipping away at this image, this carefully constructed image of the army as this sort of like, you know,
Invincible force.
invincible force, the protectors of Pakistan. And every time he does that, it's like their grip on power just weakens a little bit more.
Expert One made this point that I thought was really interesting. They said the Pakistani army, they rely on this image of being the protectors, right? Like they're the last bastion of stability in this chaotic world.
Yeah.
But that image has been tarnished. And it's not just by, Khan's accusations, but just by, the constant violence in Baluchistan, the situation in the Pashtun area.
It's like they're trying to project strength, but every time they flex their muscles, you can kind of see the cracks getting a little
Yeah.
bit wider. And let's be honest, the casualties, the unrest, it all chips away at that image of, how can you be the protectors when you're also the ones who are inflicting so much pain?
Yeah.
It's a question a lot of Pakistanis are asking.
Yep.
And, you have to wonder how the army is going to answer that question in the long term.
Especially when you have someone like Imran Khan, who's just, he's constantly there
Right.
pointing out these contradictions, right? It's like he's holding up a mirror
Yeah.
to their hypocrisy, and they just don't know how to make him look away. He's become this symbol, almost like this lightning rod for all of the frustration and all the disillusionment that's been kind of simmering beneath the surface for so long.
And the remarkable thing is they seem completely at a loss for how to deal with him
I know.
because, they can't silence him without, risking this massive backlash.
Right.
But they also can't control him, and that has to be driving them crazy.
So where does this leave Pakistan then? Like, if Expert One is right, and we are headed for some kind of, like, a major redrawing of the map,
Right.
what might that actually look like? I mean, what are the breaking points here? What are we talking about?
Well, Expert One was very clear, I think, that the discontent in Baluchistan
Yeah.
and in the Pashtun areas is really reaching a boiling point.
Yeah.
These groups feel increasingly marginalized. They're starting to coordinate their efforts more effectively.
Okay.
They're sharing tactics. They're sharing resources. They're even, sharing ideologies in a sense, right?
It's like they're realizing that they have more in common with each other than they do with
Right.
the central government at this point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a potent mix, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you consider that, the Pakistani army's usual playbook, which is, brute force, that doesn't really work against movements like the PTM that are committed to nonviolent resistance.
Right. Like you
It's a
can't
different kind of challenge.
just arrest people for,
Right.
peacefully protesting.
No. And Expert 2 made, I think, a really brilliant point about this, which is that, the Pakistani army, they know how to fight a conventional war. But when it comes to dealing with, civil society movements, peaceful protests, demands for basic rights, they're completely out of their depth.
It's like a clash of ideologies almost, right?
It is.
Where you have this old authoritarian mindset trying to impose itself on a population that's increasingly, connected to the outside world. They're exposed to different ideas. They're
Yeah.
demanding more from their leader.
And they're facing, let's not forget, real economic hardship.
Of course.
I mean, Pakistan is facing serious economic challenges, and their dependence on foreign aid, whether it's from China or the U.S., it just makes them that much more vulnerable.
It's a recipe for instability, that's for sure. And then, like we were talking about, you add in the potential for external actors like the U.S. to kind of exploit those divisions.
Right.